boxing. The heavyweight champion of the world.
All of you from the west to the east, no, you wouldn't face the beast. He's the king, the best, the force with the fist. Return to combat, he won't miss. Still today in the distance I hear, I feel the booming wind of the business cage. Here's a bar web show, here's the deal. Ready to fling on his praise, got the rage. Got the rage. Got the rage. He's got the rage. That mind of nose right up with the weight. Turn the way to cool down the heat. Working hard and waiting for the switch. Here's the jam of a boxing free. Kick, motherfucker, kick, motherfucker, kick. Kick, motherfucker, kick, motherfucker, kick. Kick, motherfucker, kick, motherfucker, kick, motherfucker, kick. He's beautiful and dynamite. The one and only dynamite. Swinging left, swinging right. Ready for another fight. Free Tyson, fuck that thing. Free Tyson, free, come on.
That's right, Free Tyson Free. Oh, I've been waiting 12 chapters to play that song and talk about the man, my childhood hero, Iron Mike Tyson. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, you are listening to a Radulich and Broadcasting special event podcast, the history of championship heavyweight boxing. We have done 11 of these so far, going all the way back to Jack Johnson and the turn-of-the-century boxers, and we are finally here. We're not at the end, but we're at possibly the chapter, my favorite chapter, that I've been looking forward to the most, Iron Mike Tyson, the man who saved heavyweight boxing in the mid-'80s. Of course, I'm not alone. Here's the real reason you love this podcast. Here's the real reason that you think we're doing a great job. I'm driving the car, but man, he's the man with all the knowledge. Ladies and gentlemen, the punchy pugilist, Mr. Pat Mullin. How do you do, sir?
Oh, wait, you're talking about me?
Yes, sir.
Quite frankly, I'm honored, and I don't know how to respond to that.
You're doing fine. Let's just keep going. Pat, you're in your 30s, right? You're mid-30s?
I am. Thanks for reminding me.
You're welcome. So I'm in my mid-40s.
I also own a cat, and I'm single.
Terrific. He's available, ladies. I grew up with Iron Mike, being a child of the 80s. I remember my dad, who was not a boxing fan, but Mike Tyson is such a cultural icon. Even my dad, who loathes violent sports and most sports in general, knew of Mike Tyson, was aware of him. And I can remember back when I was a kid, him saying that, HBO and the pay-per-view providers didn't know what to do with him because he was ending fights so fast. I remember one fight ended in the first round, as many of them did for Mike Tyson, and they just kept replaying it, and they were vamping, and they were, they just didn't know what to do with the airtime because Iron Mike was such a powerful entity. Of course, he would enter the hearts and minds of children through the Super NES, Mike Tyson's Punch-Out. That's where a lot of kids became aware of him. When did you come to Mike Tyson? I know you grew up with boxing. Your dad was a boxing fan, and you're a historian. But tell me how you came to Mike Tyson.
It's funny. This is an odd tie-in, but we'll go with it. We did a podcast a while back on Ted Bundy because we had watched the disturbingly wicked, shockingly, whatever adjectives they used to title that movie.
The Zac Efron Ted Bundy movie.
Yes, that would be the one. We watched that, and I talked about how he was kind of an omnipresent figure because his name was so in the news all the time. And in reality, even more than him, Mike Tyson was just a constant pop culture fixture in the late 80s, early 90s. He was literally everywhere. He was in video games. He would do guest appearances on TV shows like Webster and Who's the Boss, which was very commonplace in my house to have me watching either one of those. There were the constant replays of his stuff on TV. So he was in every newspaper. You couldn't escape Mike Tyson. And so we knew who he was. We knew he was this indomitable heavyweight champion and this guy with this funny voice, but he was the baddest man on the planet. And he was kind of just always there in the same way that, like, any news figure of your youth is there. Like, you may not know any of his songs, but you know who Michael Jackson is. Very, very similar to that.
Remember when he showed up on Raw and I don't. It obviously the intention was for Steve Austin to come out there and push him and have a big pull apart. That was their primary way of promoting WrestleMania 14 that year, because Mike Tyson was going to be there, and it's so funny because like that whole setup. Vince McMahon's like, Iron Mike, the baddest man on the planet, yada yada yada, and it's like that it's a gimmick, but if you're kayfabe, if you're in the moment, what the hell was Vince McMahon going to do with Mike Tyson at that point? Like, he's introducing him to the ring, and to do what exactly? What was Mike Tyson going to do? Like, I think back to that moment, and there was nothing for Vince McMahon to do with Mike Tyson other than announce him to the ring and then just sort of stare, be in awe of his greatness, unless Stone Cold came down and confronted him. I always thought that was sort of a funny, like, well, what was the plan here moment leading up to it. Obviously, the plan was for the pull apart, but, what did you think of the pull apart with Mike Tyson and Austin?
It was very fun. It was something that was 8 years in the making for Vince to try to get Tyson in there, because one of my early memories is of Mike Tyson being advertised to referee a match between Hulk Hogan and the Macho King Randy Savage on a special edition of the Main Event that was to take place in February of 1990. And we'll get to why he didn't later on, but it was one of those things where Mike Tyson was always one of those guys who seemingly could have shown up anywhere and would have made sense and nobody would have questioned it. So why wouldn't he show up in a wrestling ring to do this, especially after WCW had just done, virtually the same thing with Dennis Rodman and Karl Malone?
That was 1997. Jesus, what was Tyson doing in 97?
We'll get to that.
Yeah, we will, won't we? All right. Well, his duology with Holyfield, which ended poorly.
Yeah.
All right. Let's talk about Mike Tyson. Before he became the baddest man on the planet, before he was Iron Mike, before he was the undefeated, undisputed, lineal heavyweight champion of the world, he was just Mike Tyson, born in 1966 in Brooklyn, New York. His alleged father, Jimmy Kirkpatrick, left the family shortly after his birth to leave his mother to raise him and his 3 siblings. At age 10, the family was forced to move from Bed-Stuy, which is an area of Brooklyn, to Brownsville, which to this day is an area riddled with violent crime. They say you wrote that to me, and I have to ask, slightly off topic. I thought Brownsville was rehabilitated and all like the white people moved in.
No, absolutely not. That's there's a lot of that in Bushwick.
Okay, maybe that's what I was thinking of then, is Bushwick.
So, like, for example, on my Citizen app, which if you guys know what Citizen app is, it's a little app that has local reporting of all kinds of crime or traffic incidents, what have you. If you look at the map of Brooklyn, the area of Brownsville / East New York is just proliferated with dots.
Yeah, East New York has one of the most infamous housing projects in all of New York City, including the Bronx, which is also known for its violence. But the East New York pink houses are a war zone that would rival a third world country.
We had to drive. So the pink houses are off Linden Boulevard, which is a notoriously bad street. So when we were still in grade school, actually, I lived in a neighborhood at that time called Kensington, and so we had a school in the Kensington area that one of the kids who happened to go to our school and play basketball with us, he lived off of Linden Boulevard. And so Linden Boulevard is a very large street. It goes through Brooklyn, into Queens, into Long Island, actually. But, as you mentioned, it comes right by those pink houses. And so we were, at one point, our friend Matt's dad had to drive us all back home from the game, and he found out that he had to drive this kid back into East New York on Linden Boulevard. And we we were told at a certain point, because his dad was a bus driver, so he knew streets fairly well. He literally said to us, he goes, "I want all you to put your heads down right now." And we thought he was kidding, and Ed goes again, "No, put your heads down right now. You come up when I tell you to come up." And we were like, "Oh, okay."
I had to visit those projects as part of my job as a foster care social worker for St. Vincent Services in the early 2000s.
And that's why he doesn't work there anymore, ladies and gentlemen.
And so I was in Brownsville in East New York pretty frequently because that's where a lot of our foster parents lived, in those housing projects and houses in that area. And that's where a lot of the kids were from. And so I was there pretty frequently. And I was there early enough in the day that no one really bothered me. But, I mean, it was, even then, riddled with gangs and drugs, and it was just, it was the Wild West, you know. But that's where Mike Tyson grew up for a time. By the time he was 13, Tyson had accumulated 38 arrests to his record for various petty crimes and fights. Eventually, it's determined that Tyson needed stricter reinforcement than standard juvenile hall, and was sentenced to the Tryon School for Boys in Johnstown, New York. While there, he was mentored by a correctional officer and former professional boxer, Irish Bobby Stewart. Pat, give me 50 words on Irish Bobby.
Used to be a light heavyweight fighter, not really a contender, more a club fighter variety, but did it more as a hobby because he had a day job as a corrections officer, so he never really needed boxing as a career.
Stewart would see a talent for fighting in Tyson, which caused him to call Teddy Atlas, who was running Cus D'Amato's gym and fight stable in nearby Catskills, New York. D'Amato took an increased personal interest in Tyson because of his potential. As such, Atlas would be dismissed as Tyson's trainer following an incident with a female relative of Teddy's, and a former pro fighter and D'Amato disciple Kevin Rooney would take the reins training Tyson. Tyson was naturally adept at the peekaboo style D'Amato had created, and so talk to me a little bit about what is the peekaboo style, Pat.
So the peekaboo style is developed by Cus D'Amato, and it's got a twofold purpose to it. It's to make a guy elusive while being able to maximize his ability to hit his opponent, and at the same time, Cus, seeing the big picture of things, wanted this to be a style friendly to TV and to viewers, an exciting style that made people want to watch somebody who would fight this way. And that was the dual-fold purpose behind it. So there's it's known for basically a guy putting up his gloves up to his cheekbones, right underneath his eyes, and holding them there in position, and he's got trained reactions to certain instances of punches that are on a number system. So if a guy throws a jab, you might know that immediately you need to slip and counter with a 4, which is your jab, or you need to step over and hit him with a 1, which is a left hook. And there's this whole number system behind it that he would drill into guys so that everything would flow off of muscle memory and repetition.
So Tyson won 2 junior Olympic gold medals and made it to the finals of the Olympic box-off before losing to future professional opponent Henry Tillman. Without an Olympic hope, the decision was made to turn Tyson pro. He excelled against nondescript opposition nicknamed Kid Dynamite. Not the Dynamite Kid, whole other guy. This was Kid Dynamite and was managed by D'Amato confidants Jim Jacobs and Bill Caton. The level of Tyson's opposition gradually increased, and he was scheduled to fight early and often, fighting 27 times in 2 years as a professional, all but 2 of those fights by KO to earn a shot at the WBC heavyweight title held by, and we mentioned him in our last podcast, Forgotten Sons, Trevor Berbick. That fight takes place at the Las Vegas Hilton in Winchester, Nevada, on November 22nd, 1986, and Tyson wins by TKO in the second round, defeating Trevor Berbick for the WBC heavyweight title. And let's talk about, as short as it was, this fight for just a moment, because if you watch, and I had the time to watch, we're in an era now where there's a lot of footage on these fighters that you can find on YouTube and whatnot. So I actually found, like, all of Tyson's fights from his professional debut, all the way through the end. And so I got to see the early Mike. And he is he's not fighting wildly. I was going to use the word savage in there, but he's not fighting wildly. He's just, like, super aggressive. But he's using his hips.
He's throwing everything to kill somebody.
But the thing about Mike, and this goes all the way back to why we started this podcast about, our discussions of Deontay Wilder, Shote, and, his fights with Tyson Fury, and just sort of the lack of skill level today in heavyweight boxing as seen by Deontay Wilder. Mike Tyson's not just throwing like Roy Nelson, haymakers. He's swiveling his hips. He's got this great footwork. Pat, explain to the people, what is it about Mike Tyson? He doesn't just have loaded guns. He's got movement that gives power to those loaded guns. That's what made him so successful going into Trevor Berbick.
Oh yeah, he's really and you can go way back. And the second episode we do of this is Jack Dempsey, and Dempsey's kind of the forerunner to this, where there's the kinetic chain of energy that we talked about with him, where you just drive from your hips and your legs and shuffle that body movement and power, and you put all your body's focus and energy into that one focal point that delivers it, which is your punch, whether it's with your left hand or your right hand. And Tyson, with his very low frame, his build is 5'10". I've been around him. He's probably closer to 5'8", 5'9", maybe. But what he had was this tremendous low center of gravity that allowed him to explode with these shots from the ability to pivot, bob, shift his weight, come back from the other side, and do it again because he was so repetitively trained to do it. It was instinctual to him. And to be in position based on these calls and training specific motions to counter specific punches, it allowed him to really explode in these kinetic movements and putting all his energy into these punches, whether it was a one shot or maybe he unleashed a nasty 3-punch combination that really hurt a guy and put him out. He had that ability because he was so well trained into him to do it.
Mike Tyson was built like a fire hydrant, and he had a nasty uppercut. He also fought a lot of taller opponents because this is heavyweight, and he doesn't have heavyweight height. He has, like, middleweight height at best. But he fought a lot of taller guys who, when they weren't clinching with him, would leave themselves open to this uppercut that came from hell. Like Mike Tyson, if you've ever watched his uppercut, he swivels those hips, and that uppercut comes from the waist and goes straight up into the dude's brain. A lot of his opponents fell to that uppercut. Do you want to add anything to my description of the Mike Tyson killer uppercut before we talk about Trevor Berbick?
To me, it's the best punch in his arsenal, especially as a power shot. Great when it followed. Usually, and a lot of the secret to his uppercut, which we'll talk about, is when he got inside on somebody, he would often shift his stance into that of a southpaw stance and bring his right hand closer to his opponent, and he would normally tap them with a body shot with that right hand just to drop their guard a little bit. And what he'd do is when he tapped with that body shot, rotate his body back and just launch that uppercut up high.
So Trevor Berbick, which we talked about in our last episode, Forgotten Sons, is the WBC Heavyweight Championship, and he spends the first round of this fight, if I recall, like he's standing with Tyson. He's giving him respect, but he's also not backing down. You know, he's not. Remember, this is Mike Tyson's 27-0 coming into this after 2 years. He's not yet, known necessarily as he's known as a potential star, but I don't think anyone really saw, as we saw with our last episode, just because you're a potential star doesn't mean you're going to become one, and Mike Tyson hasn't become one yet. So Trevor Berbick's standing with him, and Mike Tyson's giving him the business. And in the second round, he knocks him down twice, and in that second knockdown, Trevor Berbick doesn't know which way is up. Like, he's trying to stand. I think he fell 3 times in total.
He did.
Like, Tyson knocked him down.
Punch.
Yeah, Tyson knocked him down. This is the second knockdown that ends the fight. And, like, he gets up, falls down, gets up, falls down, gets up, and, like, falls into the ropes of the ref or whatever. And the ref's like, you're done. I think at that point, Trevor Berbick was just working on instinct and muscle memory, because there was no brain controlling that contraption at that time. Trevor Berbick was done, and Mike Tyson begins his long march towards undisputed heavyweight champion. Any other thoughts and words about the Trevor Berbick fight?
I just always remember the way it was described to me is he knocked him down 3 times with 1 punch. And I'm thinking, like, did he mean that, like, he used the same punch to knock him down 3 times? And then when you actually see it, where he hits him with the left hook, and he falls down, tries to get up and falls down again, and then gets up and pretty much falls down a 3rd time, then you're like, that's how the physics work on that.
So Tyson, at the age of 20, is the youngest man to ever hold a heavyweight version of the heavyweight title. This was now you have to understand, and we talked about this in our last podcast, the heavyweight title is fractured. You have Michael Spinks, who is the lineal heavyweight title. He beat the man who beat the man, but he doesn't actually have a physical belt. You have Trevor Berbick, you have a WBA champion and an IBF champion, and Don King is going to be like, all right, enough's enough. Let's have a tournament. Let's have a tournament that's going to settle who's going to be the undisputed champion of the world. Pat, talk to me about Don King's tournament and how Mike Tyson ran through everybody with like a hot knife through butter.
So Don had this idea to do a heavyweight unification series, mainly because Don is not an idiot, and when he saw that the heavyweight titles had been split, he did everything he could to try to get options on everybody, because you want to have the heavyweight champion in your stable if you're promoting fights. That's just science. That's where the money is. But when he saw how much he lost with these, 1 belt out of 3 champions, or not the lineal champions, it was one of those things where he saw the bigger picture and knew that if he could get one guy while getting options on everybody, just in case the one guy he thought was going to win didn't work out, he'd still have everything he needed. And instead of paying 3 or 4 guys, he'd just be taking a big cut out of one guy and having guys waiting in the wings. So he puts together this unification tournament, which really it started way back and somehow kept going, and it was never really like a true bracketed tournament, but they just called it the Heavyweight Unification Series, and he promoted it with HBO as the backing network, and he had a plan, and while it may not have been as apparent, it worked.
Yep, Mike Tyson, the Thanos of boxing of this era, collects all the belts. So he beats Trevor Berbick, and then he moves on to Bone Crusher Smith. This doesn't end in a Mike Tyson knockout. It's a lackluster 12-round decision because Bone Crusher didn't seem to want to go toe-to-toe with Iron Mike. He kept clinching him, and it made it difficult for Tyson to do anything with him. And so he got the nickname Bone Clutcher out of it. But it gave Tyson 2 out of the 3 belts and set the stage for him to unify all 3 winning the IBF title from Tony Tucker. The Tony Tucker fight takes place at the Las Vegas Hilton on August 1st, 1987, and that is also a 12-round decision. So talk to me about the Tony Tucker fight real quick.
So Tucker, we talked about in the last episode, was actually a pretty good fighter. And he gives Mike a pretty decent scrap. Definitely the best fight of Mike's career to this point. He actually hurts him fairly early on with an uppercut that would later claim broke his hand during the fight. And he forces Mike to fight in certain instances that Tyson is not used to. And so you can see that he gets uncomfortable. He kind of doesn't know what to do at points. But Tucker just doesn't have the punch output and the energy level to constantly keep Tyson off of him. And so even at the later rounds of the fight, even though Tyson doesn't really have his A game going forward, Tucker's just very physically exhausted and doesn't resist him enough to really win the rounds and make it a true fight where there was a chance he could have won it on the cards. I think the cards were unanimous for Tyson at scores of 118 to 110, 117, 111, and 116, 112. I always end up scoring this 116, 112. I believe Larry Merchant for HBO has it the same way, if I'm not mistaken. But it's a pretty good scrap. And for a Tyson fight that goes 12 rounds, there's a lot of action in it and a pretty good fight, and it's at least competitive for most of it.
All right. So now Mike Tyson's on top of the world. He's got all three belts. He's going to go on to make some defenses of those belts. And eventually, and we'll talk about this shortly, he'll go on to fight Michael Spinks. And if you blink, you'll miss it. And he'll become the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about Mike Tyson's mental health and personal history. Because here's the thing about Mike. And here's the tragedy of Mike Tyson. What probably, like with most
that
artists...
fucking head of the class, that's what it was.
Well, hang on. I have the wiki up. I have Robin Givens' page up. Let me get there, damn it. What gives a lot of artists their unique abilities and what makes us stand in awe of them many times is mental illness. These are troubled, tortured, traumatized people. Not in every case, but in many cases. And you find out about these stories after the fact. But like... And I don't want to get into a whole debate about him, but like Kurt Cobain, for example, is seen as a voice of a generation and a talented Hall of Fame artist, and he suffered from all kinds of mental illness issues and physical illness issues that ultimately led to his demise. I'm not going to litigate the way in which his demise went down. That's a podcast for another day. But Kurt Cobain being an example. There's many others out there that talk about bipolar disorder, depression, PTSD.
Yeah, Alf.
So I'm sorry, what?
Alf.
Oh, yeah. Alf.
That's why it's faded out. People don't know.
So Mike Tyson, coming from the mean streets of New York City, obviously carried some trauma with him. And everything that made Mike Tyson great. I mean, he fought angry in the ring. He just had the skill to match, and that's what made him so devastating. That's the point that I'm getting to. And so when you can take that negative energy and that mental illness and, as one person said to me, use your superpowers for good, you get undisputed heavyweight champion Mike Tyson. You get one of the great Hall of Fame boxers of all time. Take him out of the ring, and Mike Tyson was taken advantage of by people who were savvier and smarter and crueler than he could ever be. His interpersonal relationships were suspect at best, and that leads to Robin Givens.
Let's kind of even talk about the mentorship, because you're talking about a guy who didn't have a father in his life at any point until much later into his adolescent years, when Customato legally adopted him at age 17. But again, his guiding male forces to that point have been Teddy, who he did something stupid to, or not directly, but to a family member of Teddy's, that resulted in Teddy pulling a gun on him, and then their acrimonious split. You have Kevin Rooney, who bonds with Mike to a certain extent, but is largely just his trainer. You have Cuss, who's a father figure, but also wants to ignore the delinquent stuff that Mike does, and allows him to do these things in response to him potentially becoming such a great fighter, and loves him unconditionally for it. And then you look outside of that, he's got Jimmy Jacobs and Bill Caton, and Jimmy bonds with Mike pretty well, but Jimmy's going to pass away much like Cuss does. So, he gets these figures in his life to a certain extent, and he feels abandoned because Cuss would pass away, Jimmy would pass away from cancer, and it feels like people kind of abandon him. So this is somebody who's always had a longing for this and keeps having it taken away from him. That does a job on you mentally.
Sure. So you already have this broken, traumatized individual who inside the ring is a genius and outside of the ring is a rube. And he sees a girl, according to the HBO movie on the subject. He sees a girl. She's an actress. She's Robin Simone Givens, born 1964, and she's best known for her stint on an 80s television show sitcom, which lasted 5 seasons, and I'm just now reading that going, Head of the Class, starring WKRP in Cincinnati famous actor Howard Hessman. And he sees her there, and they end up dating, and then eventually they get married. And the marriage, I think, only lasted about 9 months. Most famously, around this time, before I get it, did you ever watch Head of the Class?
Yes, I did, actually, a lot.
Okay. It was a fun show. Yeah,
I liked it.
It was put up by Warner Brothers, so I'm wondering if it's on HBO Max now that I think
I hope it is. I would love that. But I like the Billy Connolly season the best.
Fair enough. Point being, the most infamous out-of-the-ring incident up to this point that Mike Tyson had been a part of was a Barbara Walters interview he does with Robin Givens, where Robin Givens describes the marriage as hell on earth. And Mike Tyson sits there catatonic. Allegedly...
So bad.
Allegedly, Mike Tyson physically abused Robin Givens, which is not funny. But I will say this, and this is Mike Tyson's own word, so if we laugh at it, it's Mike Tyson's fault, not because we're horrible people who think hitting women is fun. But
yeah, we'll go with that.
They asked Mike Tyson, what do you think is his best punch ever? And he says, the one I gave to Robin Givens. She hit all 4 walls.
Yeah, he said he hit her with a backhand that saw her swat around like a pinball.
Oh, Michael Card.
Well, let's talk about that interview, though, where he's very clearly doped up. Like, he's operating on 1 or more psychiatric medicines at that point. Probably a heavy amount of Valium.
I was going to say, they hit him with horse tranquilizers.
Yeah, I remember Carl King always had the quote, apparently, when he was talking to his father watching that interview. And it was, Dad, what do you think? They slipped Mike a Mickey?
Yeah.
And so he that interview basically immediately said to Don King, we need to get this woman out of here like now, because she's gonna do to him what I want to do to him financially. But she will talk in 1 minute about how glowingly, how loving Michael is, and how he wants a family and all this. And she always called him Michael, which it's just annoying. Just shut up, you cunt. Michael, I get your wallet, Michael. You're just a dumb one, Michael. Like, ugh. She talked like her character on Head of the Class, but whatever. It's probably why she never got another acting job after that. But she's like, oh, Michael can be loving, and then Michael knows how to hit you without leaving a mark on you, and
which I find hard to believe. 'Cause unless he's like just doing body shots, and even then, that's going to leave bruises. Come on.
Yeah, well, you got to remember, this is the same girl whose mother tried to say that Dave Winfield of the New York Yankees gave her herpes.
Okay.
That's not a joke. Her mother, Ruth Roper, tried to sue Dave Winfield and say that he gave her herpes.
Yikes.
Dave Winfield said, hey, let's go take a test. Somehow the suit was dropped.
So in the notes that you sent me, you also wanted to bring up Ruth Roper. We just talked about that. Okay. Moving on. So we go to June of 1988, the Michael Spinks fight. This is it. This is going to crown the undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. June 27th, 1988 at Convention Hall in Atlantic City. This was the WrestleMania boxing match of its time. From Ali to June 27th, 1988, Ali's retirement, this is what it all led to. Michael Spinks versus Mike Tyson. And there were people giving Michael Spinks a shot against Mike. They thought that if Michael stayed away from Mike, if Spinks stayed away from Tyson and used that jab and didn't let Tyson get inside, and he'd ugly this up and carried it to 12 rounds, they thought Spinks could outbox the fire hydrant Mike Tyson. It did not go that way. Quite the opposite, as a matter of fact. Pat, take it away.
In 91 seconds, Mike Tyson gets inside on Michael Spinks and actually drops him with a body shot, which is the first time that Spinks had ever been down in his career. He takes a knee off of a solid right hand to the body and gets up, and Tyson immediately rushes across the ring to meet him again. Michael Spinks throws a left hook that Mike Tyson counters with a right hooker cut and puts him flat on his back looking up at the stars, and that is when we truly, for the first time in over a decade, had a truly undisputed heavyweight champion of the world.
So now we get into an interesting period with Mike. Because at this point, Mike's rocket ship should have gone straight to the moon, to the outer rims of the galaxy, and into the next galaxy. Like, Mike Tyson should have reigned supreme for years to come. But he's in the middle of all kinds of stuff happening. People are taking advantage of him. It was a party scene. And if you know what I mean by party scene, you know that he was inebriated a good amount of the times. And so he'll go on to make two successful defenses of the heavyweight title. One against Frank Bruno on February 25th in 1989 at the Las Vegas Hilton in Winchester, Nevada. And then he'll follow that up on June 21st, 1989 against Carl the Truth Williams, which I got to talk to you about this, okay? So this one ends in the first round. And Carl gets hit, I believe, with an uppercut that drops him. And he's up by the count of 9. But the ref stops the fight and says, "You're done." And I watched that ending a few times. Because it's a disputed call. Some people say the fight should have been allowed to continue. He was up. He was functional. He could answer the ref. If you listen to what the ref says, and I could kind of see it in Carl the Truth Williams' eyes, the body was standing, but the mind was out to lunch. And the ref, from his own words, said, "I asked him if he was okay, and he didn't answer me." And if you've watched enough boxing, especially today, in 2020, they'll say, "Walk left, walk right, walk to me. Are you okay to continue?" "Yes, I am." "Okay, go." There's a whole elaborate thing that happens. And the ref made a decision to save Carl Williams from himself because it looked like while physically he could stand, he mentally was not in the fight anymore. And in my opinion, debate me if you think I'm wrong, rightly stopped that fight. What do you think?
In terms of looking through him, I would agree. I think it was one of those times where he appeared to mainly not be paying attention to the referee because he was focused on Tyson. And I do think he was there. I don't think the result would have gone any differently had he been allowed to continue. Not to slight Carl Williams, but just based on the respective track records of each guy we're talking about. Because Carl had a knack for getting knocked down even when he wasn't necessarily hurt, because he just left openings every time he threw punches. And Mike was built to take advantage of that. So again, Williams threw that jab and dropped his right hand, and Tyson comes back with that hook and just dropped him. And, you can criticize the referee very easily in the moment because, again, in the post-fight interview, Williams kind of talked pretty clearly and, expressed himself well, but he didn't answer the referee's call. Got to do it.
Yeah. They say at the beginning of every fight, follow my commands at all times. You're commanded to answer, are you okay? Nod your head. Do something. You can't dismiss the referee like that. And I stand by it. I think the referee made the right call. The referee is there not just to not just to officiate a fight, but also to protect the fighters from themselves, from taking unnecessary punishment. I think the truth was done, quite frankly, and that if he had come out again, Tyson would have just knocked him out. And I think you would agree, if you can avoid taking knockout shots to the head, you probably should.
I guess. I'm not the best stat guy to ask about that.
Fair enough. All right. I want to talk about a man who lives in infamy. He has a special place in hell, as far as I'm concerned. He took advantage, unknowingly, of a man in the midst of an ugly divorce. He took advantage of a man in the midst of personal trials and tribulations. He ended the undisputed reign of the man who saved heavyweight boxing in the 80s. The villain in question. The most evil man in the history of boxing, as far as I'm concerned. And a man who holds the distinction of having one of the greatest upsets in sports history. All sports! Football, soccer, baseball, polo, cricket, all of it. He's one of the greatest upsets in sports history. Ladies and gentlemen, born April 7th, 1960, from Columbus, Ohio, the OIO, Buster Douglas. Tell me a little bit about Buster Douglas going into his second opportunity at a heavyweight title. First against Tony Tucker, in which he lost, and now a beleaguered Iron Mike Tyson. Who is this villain, Buster Douglas, Pat?
To some, he's a villain. To some, he's the ultimate hero of the ultimate underdog story. But James Buster Douglas is a guy who is a heavyweight who we talked about a little bit in our last show, where he had fought for the vacant IBF title against Tony Tucker. And, he performed well, but then ultimately ran out of gas and didn't have the ability to continue and let Tucker just keep punching him until they stopped the fight. And this had been Buster's MO to that point in time, that he was a guy with good skills and a lot of fundamentals and good size and a lot of things on his side, but just a poor work ethic and didn't really ever put it all together and never would. So after his loss to Tucker, his career is at a crossroads and they make some difficult decisions. And among them is, firing his dad from his camp because he felt like they just weren't a good mix. And that's not uncommon with fighters and their fathers as trainers. A lot of times it gets very bad very quick. You think of guys like Gregorio Benitez and Wilfred Benitez and how tumultuous that relationship was. Even in instances where a guy needs to do something outside the box, Jack and Shane Mosley, Felix Trinidad and Don Felix Sr. A lot of odd history between fathers and sons with respect to being a trainer or manager to his son. And Buster made the decision that it was in his best interest not to have his dad former 70s middleweight in his corner anymore. And what this led to was John Johnson taking over the camp, and Buster got a new trainer and nutritionist and got himself in shape and started working really hard. And he puts together a really solid win streak, capped off by 2 wins against a former world heavyweight champion in Trevor Berbick and a future world champion in Oliver McCall, who also happens to be Mike Tyson's chief sparring partner at the time, because they put Oliver in with Mike because they knew Oliver could take pretty much the best punch of anybody around and was going to make Tyson work. And you can actually watch some of those sparring sessions on YouTube, and they're a lot better than a lot of heavyweight fights right now.
But Pat, don't you understand what makes him the real villain in this story? Is that we were supposed to get Mike Tyson versus up-and-comer 2-division champion Evander Holyfield. This was just supposed to be a jobber match. This was supposed to be a squash for Mike Tyson. He was supposed to go into the house that Kenny Omega built, the Tokyo Dome, and you're welcome. And he was supposed to, put down for the Japanese fans, give him an attraction, this nobody, this ham and egger, Buster Douglas, and then move on up to the east side where Evander Holyfield was up and coming and waiting for him. And he spoiled it! He spoiled Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield in their primes. 1990, Pat. 1990.
Well, let's be fair and look at the situation as a whole. This fight wasn't even supposed to happen initially. What was initially supposed to happen was Mike was supposed to defend the heavyweight title in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, 2 months before this, in November of 1989 against Razor Ruddock. Tyson said he was sick, and they canceled the fight. And rather than reschedule with Ruddock, he went on and opted to fight Buster instead, because Buster was working as a carpet delivery boy in Columbus, Ohio, while supplementing his fighting income, as it were. Now, again, we're talking about, this was supposed to be the setup until we got the former undisputed cruiserweight champion Evander Holyfield against Mike. But let's go circle back to the Spinks fight, because there's a part of that we didn't put in, and he had 2 subsequent fights, but there's something we didn't talk about after the Michael Spinks fight that happened. And that's that Tyson severed all ties with his current team.
Okay.
Now, that included his then manager, Bill Caton, who had assumed sole managerial duties since the passing of his partner, Jim Jacobs. That included, perhaps most importantly, head trainer Kevin Rooney, who was, again, responsible for molding Mike largely into the fighter that he had become when he was at his optimal best. And largely these are under the machinations of both Robin Givens and Don King, who eventually, of course, turn on each other as cannibals do. Because there's just not enough of the pie for everybody. But they were alleging misappropriation of Tyson's funds by Caton. They were alleging that Rooney exerted too much control. They were asking why Tyson was still paying all the bills for the house that Camille Ewald, who was Customato's life partner, that she lived in. Why was Michael still, paying all the bills for that house? And really insane things that eventually they were able to convince this simpleton to sever all these ties with these people because they're bad for you and we're looking out for your best interest. And ultimately what results is not anything in Mike's best interest for about a decade.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about the infamous upset between Mike Tyson and Buster Douglas. You can tell that his outside troubles are affecting his performance. Mike Tyson fights this fight not like Mike Tyson. He has one round where he knocks, I think it's the 8th or 9th round. It's the 8th round, I believe.
Yes.
Where he knocks down Buster Douglas and he seems like he's going to win the fight. But up until that point, he was sluggish. There was a lot of clinching going on. And Buster Douglas is, he's not a genius in there, but he's having his way with Mike, who just doesn't have the dynamic punching power and footwork that he normally would in a fight. Like, he seemed... You know, I said this about Anthony Joshua in his fight with Andy Ruiz. He seemed drugged. And I'm not saying he was on drugs, and I'm not saying he was drugged. It's just he fought like he was on drugs in that particular fight. And Buster was able to win nearly every single round going into round 8. Round 9, after being knocked down, Buster regains his composure, and Mike Tyson, I think, has woken up at this point, and he, it's a more competitive fight in round 9, and then in round 10, Mike Tyson got knocked out. And for one brief shining moment, for one piece of boxing history, your undisputed, undefeated heavyweight champion of the world is Buster Douglas. God bless you, brother. You got a video game out of this.
An awesome video game for Sega.
Well, it won't last long, and he'll lose it to said up-and-comer and former cruiserweight champion Evander Holyfield on October 29th, 1990 at the Mirage in Paradise, Nevada. We will talk about Evander Holyfield and Riddick Bowe, for that matter, in our next episode next month, but we'll leave it there for now regarding Buster and the heavyweight title. Evander will go on to do his thing with it, and eventually, getting us back to Mike Tyson, those two will meet, but not just yet. Just to close out on Buster Douglas, he'll win several more fights between June of 1996 and July of 1997. He'll get one more shot at a heavyweight title. Pat, what the hell is the IBA?
What the hell is what?
The IBA.
A non-important entity that is not a recognized World Heavyweight Championship or a championship of any kind.
So their Cracker Jack Championship heavyweight title is offered in a fight against Lou Savarese, and Lou Savarese KOs him in the first round. For shits and giggles, he'll have two more fights, one in Boise, Idaho, and then he'll finish out his career against Andre Crowder with a TKO in the first round in Burlington, Iowa, where the Caucasus are.
I got to throw one Buster story in there.
Okay.
So, Buster has a comeback fight after being in a diabetic coma at one point where he almost died because he ballooned up to 400 pounds. And his first fight is against a guy named Tony La Rosa, who's a heavyweight trial horse. And I only want to tell this because I don't know when I'll get to tell it again, but it was on the undercard of the first Roberto Duran Hector Camacho pay-per-view in 95 or 96. And Buster Douglas is the main semifinal bout, because it's his first bout in forever. And we're watching the fight, whatever, and me and my cousin John are watching it together, and there's one point where it looks like La Rosa says something to Buster, and Buster responds by hitting him with a telephone pole jab, a left uppercut, and a right hand, and just dropping him. So we both look at each other and we're like, yeah, he called him the N-word, didn't he? Because it elicited that type of response.
All right, so what follows is the Mike Tyson Rehabilitation Tour Part 1. Attempted. And he will pick up wins against Henry Tillman in the first round, Alex Stewart in the first round. He'll fight back-to-back fights with Donovan Ruddock. Pat, 50 words or less, why 2 fights with Donovan Ruddock?
Because the first one was stopped under highly controversial circumstances by a referee who is just awful and only got bouts because of his ties to Don King named Richard Steele.
All right, so after these duo fights with Ruddock, of which he wins via controversial TKO in the 7th round and then another 12-round decision, what's supposed to follow is his fight with Evander Holyfield. Now,
so don't go throwing all the blame at Buster for this one.
Yeah, Mike Tyson messed this up for himself.
No, we'll talk about that too. But
all right, so it isn't just the rape conviction that scuttles his fight with Evander Holyfield. I think the first time he's injured and they have to delay it. What was the second thing?
So the first one was a rib injury that happened basically to, I forget what the exact circumstances were, but they were supposed to do it, and the thing was Mike Tyson had a rib injury, so they had to postpone the fight.
All right. So the second thing was then the rape conviction. There was only two. There were two delays.
Yeah, I think
three.
it was a rib injury that they said he incurred in sparring.
Mm-hmm. All right, so I don't want to litigate this on this podcast. That's not what we're here for. The man was accused. He had his trial. Presumably, it was fair.
Yeah, presumably not, but that's okay.
We're not going to litigate it. We weren't there. He is.
No, but I don't know what else you quite frankly do when someone calls you to come down to their limo at 2 a.m. Unless you're a hooker.
Okay. Do you feel the need to get anything else off your chest here before I continue with this?
Yeah, this was a girl who cried wolf to get famous.
Okay. Folks, if you have anything to say about that, you can follow Pat on whatever his social media is, and you can get in touch with him that way. I am going to just say, being fair and impartial, as I always am, that he was charged, he had a trial, presumably it was fair, and he was convicted of rape. And thus the rehabilitation train stopping at Evander Holyfield was utterly derailed. Despite being 25 years old at the time of the crime, he was assigned to the Indiana Youth Center, now the Plainville Correctional Facility, in April of 1992, and he was released in March of 95. So for 3 years, he does not actively fight. He will make his comeback upon being freed from this correctional facility in August of 1995 against Peter McNeely, which ends in a first-round DQ after his manager entered the ring. What?
Yeah, they don't say his manager entered the ring to stop a homicide. Peter McNeely, of course, would go on to do a commercial after this fight where he gets knocked out by a Pizza Hut pizza. Wait, no, I might be wrong. It might have been Little Caesars. I'm sorry.
That takes us to 1995, December 16th, at the Core State Spectrum in Philadelphia, where he will fight, as we've mentioned him before on previous podcasts, Buster Mathis Jr., and he'll KO him in the third round. So we are on Tyson Rehabilitation Tour Part 2. We are slowly but surely marching towards Now, in the interim, we had Evander Holyfield and the rise of Lennox Lewis, and the short but interesting career of Riddick Bowe, which we'll talk about Riddick Bowe and Evander Holyfield on our next episode, and then Lennox Lewis gets his own episode as well. So just know that that's what's happening in the 3 years that Tyson is imprisoned. But he's out now, and he's got 2 wins, and they're rushing to get him back into the heavyweight title picture, which, by the way, has gone back to 1980. Oh, the titles are everywhere. Pat, we've got a WBC title over Mia. We've got a WBA title over Mia, and an IBF title over Mia. And they look around and they say, only Tyson can go to China. Only Tyson can reunite these belts. They start with Frank Bruno at the MGM Grand in Paradise, Nevada. He TKOs Frank Bruno in the third round to win the WBC title. And then it's a hop, skip, and a jump to Bruce Seldon, who I believe we also mentioned in a previous podcast. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think we touched on Bruce.
We'll touch on Bruce then. Touch him hard.
I would, but he'll fall over.
All right. Anything else about Bruce Seldon? How did he get to be the WBA champion?
He won an elimination bout because Big George gave up the WBA title after beating Michael Moore So Bruce Seldon actually won an elimination bout against their number one contender, Tony Tucker.
Aha. And the aforementioned George Foreman will also be getting his own episode, as he had a career resurgence during this time after leaving the sport of boxing back in the Ali era. So we will get to talk about George sooner than later. In any case, Bruce Seldon is dispatched easily in the first round, and Mike is now the WBA and WBC champion. And we get to, finally, November 9th, 1996, which was also delayed, by the way. Like, they'd planned to do this earlier, and what was the reason for the first delay this time around?
Oh, jeez, what was it on this one? I'm trying to remember.
There was something that happened. I don't remember what at this point.
Yeah, something got pushed.
In any case, we finally get to the fight that was spoiled by Buster Douglas. Mike Tyson versus Evander Holyfield for the WBA title. Just the WBA title. And wouldn't you know who won the pony? Evander Holyfield defeats Mike Tyson in the 11th round by TKO. Just beat him senseless in that round. Pat, tell me about this fight and the finer points of it.
Well, you know, a lot of people expected, because Holyfield hadn't looked good in the lead up to this in his past few fights, that this was going to be kind of sending a lamb to the slaughter. But, you know, Holyfield at this time still had enough in him physically to really match that willpower that he always showed when adversity reared its head. And that's one area where Evander Holyfield will always hold an advantage over Mike Tyson, because when adversity came about, they each reacted in very polar opposite ways. Holyfield seemed to rise to it and thrive against adversity, whereas Tyson would just kind of curl into a shell and die. And what you had here was Tyson wasn't allowed to physically bully Holyfield around, because Holyfield was right there to give it back to him, and he landed sharp counter punches, whereas Mike was, you know, as soon as he started getting hit back, wasn't throwing combinations. He was looking for one big shot at a time. And Holyfield really worked an intelligent game plan, made Tyson shift his feet a lot to not be able to set his punches. And when Holyfield saw counter opportunities, he took them. He dropped him, I believe it was the 6th round, with that counter right hand to the upper torso, and dropped him pretty hard on the seat of his pants, and just continued pressing on. And then in the 11th round, when they thought he was ready for the taking, Holyfield jumped on him and just never let off of him and beat him into the ropes, and eventually they stopped it. And you just had this Cinderella story happen of the ultimate good guy at the time beating the ultimate bad guy.
Well, Tyson's troubles with belts don't end there. Because he chose to fight Holyfield for the WBA title, the WBC stripped Tyson of their belt. But that's okay. Tyson's going to have a rematch against Evander Holyfield. And here's where I have to vent a little bit. This is the infamous bite. Twice. Times 2. This is the infamous bite fight. The excuse that Tyson will make on June 28, 1997 at the MGM Grand against Evander Holyfield is that Evander Holyfield kept headbutting him. I watched the fight. I don't see any outwardly obvious headbutting. You know, it's funny, I just watched a fight on ESPN that a guy got cut over the eye by what they said was a headbutt, and because it happened in like the 2nd round, I think, and they replayed it ad nauseum while the commission and the replay people, and it was just this was like a 6-minute fight that took 20 minutes to deliberate who won the fight. The ref said the cut was caused by a butt, and they eventually backed him up, but the commentator was like, there was no butt, he got punched in the eye. Though Timothy Bradley insisted it was a thumb in the eye, and they were like, yes, but that's not how gloves work, so it's a punch. Moving on. Watching the Evander Holyfield fight, and I just want you to talk to this specific point, Pat. Did you see Evander Holyfield purposely butting Mike Tyson? Because the reason why I brought up the ESPN thing was there was a lot of face-to-face contact, but I wouldn't necessarily call them butts. I've seen headbutts. I've watched enough professional wrestling. I've seen movies. Like, I know when I see a real butt, as opposed to you're clinching and you're going cheek to cheek and maybe you mush your faces against each other. But that's not headbutting. Did you see Evander Holyfield, like, purposely, and I want to stress the word purposely, headbutt Mike Tyson?
Not in this fight.
Okay.
I think part of the issue is that in Tyson, you have somebody who is shorter and looking to come in on the inside and is leading with his head against a guy who, when you get inside on him, his first instinct is not to clinch. His instinct is to drop his own head and go face-to-face and toe-to-toe with you and try to fight you back. And, sometimes that is going to result in an accidental clash of heads, but when you're both leading with your head, that's going to happen. And both guys did. I think there's definitely later fights, not against Tyson, where Holyfield used his head as his most effective weapon, but this is not one of them.
Right.
This is a case where two guys are coming in. One guy's coming in with his head, one guy's dropping his head to meet him, and so they butt a little bit. But I never saw egregious levels of headbutting like I've seen in other fights, and I certainly didn't see intentional attempts at headbutts.
But that's the hill Tyson chooses to die on, and he bites Holyfield, and Holyfield does what looks like to be like a Baptist minister getting the spirit dance. Watch the fight; it's hilarious. Tyson's deducted points, 2 points for intentional biting, and the ref tells him at that time, "Do it again, and we're done. You're done. The fight's over," and immediately bites him again. Just this, didn't even give him a chance. Didn't try to fight. Just They called it a shark bite. And here's where I just presented this entire argument that Tyson bit him for no reason. I think Tyson mentally was out of this fight. Like, it didn't go his way. Things have not gone his way since 1989. It's 1996. And yes, he's had wins since then, but he's also been to prison. He's been divorced. He's, I think, misspent his money, so I think he's hurting for cash at this point.
Well, when you have friends who are on your payroll for $250,000 a year, that doesn't help.
Yeah, so he's in the red, he's divorced, he's been to prison, he's been accused of rape. He's he's gone from cultural icon to cultural pariah. And not to mention the fact that the fights aren't coming easy unless the opponent's easy. And he's struggling with Evander Holyfield, and he just got knocked out a year, 6 months rather, before, a little more than 6 months. I don't think Tyson mentally was prepared for this fight. I certainly don't think he was prepared for the uphill struggle he was facing against Holyfield. And I think, and one of the commentators made a point of saying this, and I tend to agree with it, I think he just wanted out of the fight. I think he was done, and he didn't want to get knocked out, and this was his way out while looking vicious. And I think projecting an aura of viciousness and unpredictability, which we'll see in the promotion for the Lennox Lewis fight later on, I think that's what was happening here. I think he unraveled and was like, I have to save face. Fuck it, I'll bite him again. People will think I'm an animal. I won't look like a pussy. I won't get knocked out either. And so what? I won't be heavyweight champion. I'm still youngish. Fights will come. What do you think, Pat?
Yeah, I don't think he was ever mentally in the second fight. We've talked before about guys who, in rematches for the heavyweight title, we talk about, for example, Rocky Marciano and Jersey Joe Walcott, where Walcott seemingly fought what was to that point the best fight of his career against Marciano the first time, and Marciano still caught him and knocked him out. And it's almost like there's a resistance level that gets broken, and you just don't have it in you to fight that guy again. And I think that's the same thing with Mike. And people who know Mike better than you or I know him on the inside have always said that Mike could not face adversity, could not face his own situations where he wasn't invincible, Iron Mike. And this appeared to be one of them because, again, it looked like he was looking for a way out without actually losing, which is not an uncommon thing for somebody who lacks maturity to do. They don't want to take the loss and take their medicine. They want to find the coward's way out, basically, so they could say, yeah, well, I lost, but they didn't really beat me. And that's essentially what he did here.
The final point I want to make about this, and then we can move on and to the last chapter of Mike's boxing career. I feel like he's unfairly maligned when people only focus on the bite fight. The bite fight seems to have defined Mike Tyson's career. Instead of seeing him as the man who saved heavyweight boxing in the 80s, the undisputed champion, a knockout artist, one of the most brilliant fighters in the past 100 years, a Hall of Famer, he's known as the crazy bipolar guy who bit another guy in the ring. And I don't think that's fair. If we can't forgive one incident and look at the whole context of a human being's career, I don't know what we're doing. And I think when people only define Mike Tyson by Holyfield 2 and the bite, I think you are seriously undercutting one of the great champions of our age. And it's not just because I'm a fan. I feel like when you look at the context of the bite, you see a guy who clearly did wrong, and no one's saying he didn't, but it was one incident. And I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I'm going to give you the final word on the bite and Mike Tyson's legacy, and then we're going to look at the last chapter of Mike Tyson's career, and we'll close out.
I think it's in many ways a microcosm of Mike's greatest problems outlined in one instance, where you don't see any of his successes. And there's always that part of people that focuses more on the negatives or the shortcomings than on the successes and things that people do well. There's an old saying, you can build 1,000 bridges and you can be the best bridge builder in the world, but if you give one blowjob, you're the guy who sucked that other guy off.
Right.
And that's pretty much what this has played out to be. You can forget that this guy took out 4 other guys with claims to a championship to reunify the heavyweight division and did it in dominating fashion because one night he showed up and mentally didn't want to be there and decided to just bite somebody as if that was the sum total of his career. And it's not. And is it fair? No, but sadly we're used to things not being fair and seeing stuff like this be what outlines an otherwise great career for the most part.
So the Mike Tyson Redemption Tour Part 3 takes place beginning with Francis Botha at the MGM Grand on January 16th, 1999.
Yeah, he tried to break his arm.
This is after Mike Tyson's second stint in prison, by the way, this time for beating up some motorists. Shit happens.
Yes, and he's also going to get barred from the United States for a little while for boxing.
So yes, he tries to break Francois Botha's arm in this fight, and the referee has to forcibly separate them. Anyway, it's a 5th round KO for Mike Tyson. He fights later in the year against Olin Norris. Norris was unable to continue from a Tyson foul, so things. This is an ugly chapter from Mike Tyson's boxing career. This does not end well for him. He goes to England and he fights Julius Francis, and it's a 2nd round TKO. No major notes there. He fights Lou Savarese, knocks him out in a first round in Scotland in 2000. We need to talk about Andrew Galata, king of the nutshots, for just a moment.
It's okay.
So I watched a video about the history of boxing during this time, and there was some time spent talking about Andrew Galata, the white hype of that. Besides Morrison, the other white hype of that era. Only Andrew Galata has a small problem. He just loves to hit you in the balls. This guy.
He's just a nut, is what he was at that time.
There's the thought from some people, from some quarters of the fight world, where if you're only going to get a warning the first time, just open up and kick a guy right in the balls. And that was sort of
But it wasn't even just biting with Andrew. Like, again, we're talking about Mike and his bites, or excuse me, with low blows with Andrew. We talk about Mike being the bite guy and Galata being the low blow guy. People tend to forget that Galata also nearly got disqualified for biting Samson Pua on the neck like a vampire in a fight that he was handily winning against Donnell Nicholson on HBO. He decided to just flagrantly headbutt him. Andrew had some kind of a street thug inside of him telling him, do these things, and I don't know what for. I really don't know what for, but he just did them, and it was just one of those things you couldn't explain. And
Andrew Galata might be my favorite fighter after what's his face, Jerry Quarry, just because he's hilariously bad. He's framed as an up and comer and a possible superstar, and then he's punching everybody in the dick and doing all kinds of crazy things.
Everybody, he's punching Riddick Bowe a lot in the dick. A lot. Thank God Bo already had six kids, because he wouldn't have had any more if he wanted to.
Andrew Galata, king of the nut shot. I don't know. Andrew had something wrong with him psychologically for a while that it took a lot of years to get out. His comeback is a fun one, though. You know what? Nothing but love for you, Andrew Galata. All right, in any case, Tyson dispatched him in 3 rounds. Not that it matters, because it was overturned due to a failed drug test. He then goes to Denmark in October...
Denmark, you say?
Yes. October 13th of 2001, where he fights Brian Nielsen and retires him on the stool in 6 rounds. Which leads us to the Lennox Lewis fight, which nobody would sanction. Nevada turned down money, said no thank you. Get this animal out of here. We don't want Mike Tyson. Madison Square Garden. The icon, the king, the top of the heap. New York City, where stars are made. If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere. And they said, fuck Mike Tyson. No thank you. California said no. Everyone said no. So they went to Jerry Lawler territory, where Tennessee will say yes to anything. Lennox Lewis versus
Jerry Lawler.
Lennox Lewis versus Mike Tyson for all the belts for the lineal undisputed heavyweight championship of the world at the Pyramid on June 8th, 2002. Lennox Lewis, Mike Tyson, and we talked about this with Ali, where he would just say all kinds of horrible things to prop up a fight and promote the fight, and then afterwards it was like, oh, I was just kidding, it was just to promote the fight, no hard feelings, chum. And sometimes he got away with it, and sometimes smoking Joe Frazier. Well, Mike Tyson wanted to eat Lennox Lewis's children, and Mike Tyson chose to start a brawl with Lennox Lewis, and this fight actually starts with security standing in a line diagonally across the ring to separate them. They fever pitched this up to near riotous temperatures. Lennox Lewis versus Mike Tyson on June 8th, 2002 at the Pyramid in Memphis, Tennessee was the hottest ticket in town at that time. And while Lennox Lewis, we're going to give him his own episode, so I don't want to talk too much about him, but Lennox Lewis is seen as not the guy that can handle Mike Tyson's savagery. It's a classic brawler versus boxer setup. And so you have some commentator saying Lennox Lewis is going to outbox Mike. He's going to keep at the end of his jab. It's going to be a clinic, and a beaten up and brutalized and over the hill Mike Tyson isn't going to be able to keep up with the younger Lennox Lewis. On the other hand, you had commentators saying Lennox Lewis is a fop and can't handle which some of his promotion didn't do him any favors in that in that way. But, you know, he's a fop, and he's British, and he's, you know, pillow-fisted, and Mike Tyson's going to have his way with Lennox Lewis because Mike Tyson is a savage punching tank. And Mike Tyson was KO'd in 8 rounds. Pat, the finer points of Lennox Lewis versus Mike Tyson.
You know, at this point, people really try to convince themselves that Mike Tyson had a chance. And I don't know if it was because of Lewis having one bad night against Hasim Rahman, which we'll talk about on his show. But the fact of the matter is, you're taking a guy in Tyson who hadn't really fought a relevant guy in years, and with a successful result on top of that. And you look at Lennox, who, again, reunified the heavyweight championships, all 3 of them, defended them, was knocking guys out, was looking great, really was a guy who got better with age and maturity. So the idea that Mike Tyson would be in there and should be looked at as having a realistic possibility of beating Lewis, I think that was something people wanted to convince themselves of because they wanted, more than anything, maybe just this character to hold a championship so they could have something to talk about, more so than just this great athlete who was at the peak of his powers, dominating him and beating him into the ground.
It's basically over for Mike Tyson at this point. He has 3 more fights. He loses 2 out of 3 of them. He beat Clifford Etienne by KO in 1 round, February 22nd, 2003, back in Memphis. He goes to Freedom Hall, loses to Danny Williams, then takes a short trip in 2005 over to the MCI Center in D.C. and gets promptly retired on the stool by Kevin McBride. And until a week from Saturday, that's the end of Mike Tyson's boxing career. You know, we talked about his celebrity status. Mike Tyson did a one-man show. I believe he's either written or had a ghost author write for him a book. He's had a cartoon, Mike Tyson Mysteries. He showed up in a recent episode of AEW. I think he was at Double or Nothing and confronted Chris Jericho. And he presented Cody with the belt is what happened. So yeah, he was on a pay-per-view and then he showed up like the next night at Dynamite. Mike Tyson has had his ups and downs. He's been in movies. He got a face tattoo. A lot of people know Mike Tyson as from being in the Hangover movies. Let me say this about Mike Tyson. Mike Tyson's the classic story of wasted potential, of somebody who got a lot very quickly and kind of exploded. Many people before him hit the height of heights and had the world at their fingertips and promptly fumbled it and fell on their face because they couldn't handle it. Many people after Mike Tyson fumbled it and couldn't handle it and fell on their face. Many more people will take their angst and trauma and mental illness and churn it into a wonderful career in arts and sports and be at the top of the world, promptly fumble it and fall on their face. I'm not going to criticize Mike Tyson for falling into the same trap that hundreds, thousands of other celebrities have fallen into. I think Mike Tyson has done the best with the hand that he's been dealt. He is a challenged individual who had an opportunity at greatness, and maybe more had he had some people in his life saying, walk this way, not that way, Mike. But the world's a shitty place at times, and sometimes you don't get that, and you fall on your face, and the potential that's out there to do even greater things than he had already done in becoming the undisputed world champion, he'll never be able to do. I look at Mike Tyson's career after Buster Douglas, and I think, what could have been? And for me, I will always see him as one of the great Hall of Fame, undisputed heavyweight boxers of all time. In terms of boxing acumen, everyone who fights should aspire to be Mike Tyson. Pat, I'll give you the last word.
I think Mike is one of those guys whose talent often belies his standing, in that if you talk to people and ask them can they name a heavyweight champion or a heavyweight fighter, the likely two answers you will always get are Muhammad Ali or Mike Tyson. And it's because he became such a pop culture phenomena, the right guy at the right time to really save the heavyweight division from a lack of talent and a lot of disparity. With regards to what he accomplished, it's not enough for what he could have done. He's a guy whose spectacular abilities were never fully put into play to see what they could really do at a top level. The returns we got on him in certain instances don't really give you the idea that maybe he could have done more. So it's, again, a lot of questions as to what he could have done in certain situations. What if he had fought Holyfield in 1991 when they were going to fight then? What if he had fought Riddick Bowe had he not gone to jail? What if he had fought a lot of these great 90s heavyweights that he never got a chance to, seemingly? And you can only go by either judgment of, well, he was able to do this, this, and this, or, well, he failed against this, this, and this. And so I think we'll always kind of have more questions about Mike than we really do answers. And do I think he had a great career? I do. I think he had a career that 90% of the heavyweights in the history of boxing will be envious of. But I think there's that 10% above him that say he had a good career, but I don't know that I'd call it great because they're comparing him to themselves. And I just think there's been greater careers, even if the guys had less talent, less potential, because they did more with what they had than what Mike was able to do with what he had. And, partly through his own fault. You can't completely absolve him for the mistakes that were made in his dealings with other people on the outside. At a certain point, you have to take some responsibility for yourself, which it seems like nowadays he's done, which is good. But it's ultimately a case of the thing missing on Mike's resume more than anything is one great signature win over an all-time great heavyweight. And he just doesn't have it. And maybe it's not fair to him historically, but it is what it is.
So, two pieces of business before we close out. One, if you don't think Mike Tyson was a box office attraction, I have some numbers I'd like to share with you. Pat, when you talk about pay-per-view buys, over 1 million is the goal, right? If you've done over 1 million, this was a profitable fight, all things considered. Wouldn't you say?
A little less than 1 million. 1 million's kind of a big deal. It's more if you're again putting up the cost of what you pay. Generally, if you're getting above the 350,000 to 400,000 buy rate range, you're doing pretty good.
So let's go high and say 400,000. Okay, you have to do more than 400,000 to be successful. Tyson versus Spinks, 700,000 buys. Tyson versus Ruddock 1, 960,000. Tyson Ruddock 2, 1,250,000. Tyson McNeely, 1,600,000. Tyson Bruno 2, 1,400,000. Tyson Selden, 1,150,000. Tyson Holyfield 1, 1,600,000. Tyson Holyfield 2, almost 2 million. He was 10 million short. Tyson Botha, 750. Tyson versus the Nutshot King, 450. Tyson Lewis, again, he's so close. This time by a fraction of $30 million from $2 million. And then the last...
30 what?
Sorry, 30,000, sorry. He had 1,970,000 buys for the HBO Showtime joint promotion of Lucent versus Tyson. And then the last three were less than 400,000, but we've already talked that the bloom was off the rose by this point. But when you think about what Tyson not just did for the sport of it, but what he did in terms of financial viability, nearly every one of his fights, by your standard, you got to get over 400,000. He blew almost all of them out of the park. Like, we talk about wrestling, and we talk about $1 million UFC pay-per-views, and this one getting 1 million buys, and that one, and Brock Lesnar, and what's his face, Irish McGee, Conor McGregor, and Mike Tyson was doing that, fight after fight after fight. But by the way, in addition to pay-per-view, his closed circuit buys in 88 and 97, the first one being Spinks, the second one being Tyson Holyfield 2, 800,000 buys for Spinks, and then 120,000 for this on closed circuit. Most people watched it on pay-per-view for Holyfield Tyson 2. So you can't take that away from Tyson. Tyson was a box office smash. Lastly, before we go, as I said before, Tyson is doing an exhibition bout on November 28th against Roy Jones Jr. And Pat, I don't know if you're going to watch it. Probably not. I am going to watch it with no pants on.
Why would you say probably not?
I thought you were done with boxing. I thought you and Gavin were standing on a high hill somewhere saying no more boxing for us.
No, when?
So you're going to watch Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr.?
Yeah.
Hot dog. Make a prediction for me.
Roy Jones wins on points.
You think so, huh?
I think if Mike doesn't get him in the first round, I don't think he's going to get him.
I'm predicting first round knockout. So, if people are interested in Tyson versus Roy Jones Jr., that's going to be on pay-per-view. I'm watching it through the Fight app, FITE, and it's like a $50 pay-per-view. So, for those...
You'll also get the benefit of seeing Jake Paul of YouTube fame versus Nate Robinson, formerly of the New York Knicks and Denver Nuggets.
Giggity. I can't wait.
What if you like actual boxing? Badu Jack is on the pay-per-view.
Yes, Badu Jack. All right, next month, the aforementioned white hat to Mike Tyson's black hat, Evander, the Spirit Got Me Holyfield. Yes, sir. Undisputed, undefeated, heavyweight champion of the world, Evander Holyfield. Pat, 50 words or less, what are we going to talk about next month on December 16th with Evander Holyfield?
One of the most beloved heavyweights of his era, who came up from cruiserweight and despite being undersized, fought with a heart about 10 times the size of anyone else's. We'll talk his tremendous trilogy with Riddick Bowe, his retirement, fighting through heart problems, and his ultimately 4 reigns as heavyweight champion of the world.
All right. Well, I can't wait. I hope you can't either, and you'll hear from us again on Evander Holyfield December 16th. That's when we plan to record that show. In the meantime, Patty, you doing anything else? You got any other podcasts going on?
Shockingly, no, I don't.
All right. Well, then that's it for this chapter in the history of heavyweight boxing. I gotta say, I normally say be well, be safe, and behave, but instead we're going to close out with the Holy Gang. Free Tyson, free!